I would even argue that citing that should exacerbate my point, not minimize it. You know, I drive an electric car. My wife drives an electric car. I believe in electric cars. They're a big part of how we're going to get there. But frankly, getting 20 people on a bus reduces GHGs a lot more than me driving one electric car. So I would say that that's good. I'm glad we made that investment, but it also underscores that we're not doing enough on transit when we need to be making sure that disadvantaged communities see the results of these monies, and that it is a very powerful way to reduce GHGs. It's not very sexy. Transit, I guess, is not sexy even here on the Capitol, but it's vital if we're going to make these goals real.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Goals real. And I want to explore that for just a little bit. I understand that the Air Resources Board has concluded that we will meet the 2020 carbon reduction goals. But I also understand that that is as a result of, in 2010, the energy use baseline was reduced to account for the recession and the like. As the economy improves and over time, will that baseline be readjusted to demonstrate the actual energy use in an improving economy? Or will we stay at what, in my judgment, is an artificial baseline? And then it seems to me that patting ourselves on the back for reaching an artificially established baseline in 2010 does not take into account whether or not increased energy use is taking place as a result of the economy improving, or whether we are actually having a significant impact with the billions of dollars that we are spending, if in fact the baseline is artificially low.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say that at the end of the day, we all need to recognize that climate change is a significant problem. And a smoke and mirrors approach to saying that you're achieving your goals isn't going to help us to address that problem. And so we are continually looking at where are we in terms of reducing our emissions. Are we on? So we think we're on a track to meet our goals in 2020, but we need to continually evaluate that to make sure that we are going to meet that target. I'll also note that there are a variety of ways, there are a variety of programs, and we need to continue to assess these programs that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not only the cap and trade program, but it is the RPS and having 33% renewables, which means that our energy will be cleaner that we are using. It is building efficiencies so that we're using less electricity. It is the promotion of electric vehicles and changing transportation and changing public transit. So you're correct that part of that reduction in emissions in 2010 was related to the economy. But we're pressing forward on a whole number of programs that we think that in 2020 we'll be able to look back and say, yeah, yes, we did legitimately meet our targets through this wide variety of programs, which are cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions in a variety of sectors.
I continue to have real concerns over the price tag of the entire policy, what I consider to be a sort of a wet blanket approach over the economy in general. And I really need to be able to identify, and I mean, if you've reduced the benchmark based on reduced energy use, if in fact we have a growing economy, are there additional is there additional information about the energy use? Has that energy use significantly moderated as a result of those policies? And whether or not we actually are having some kind of an economic analysis of energy use, job creation, those kinds of things. So I will be looking for evidence that the goals that we are establishing, based and predicated upon a reduced baseline, this is real. If in fact we're looking at a 2010 baseline and we have an improving economy and more energy used, it would be very interesting to know whether that energy mix is in fact attributing to less greenhouse gases at the same time that an economy is growing, and at the same time when we are surcharging carbon fuels, et cetera. I mean, I think the goals are important, but I do think that there are significant impacts on all kinds of people in the economy. I hear it all the time. So I need to be able to report to my own constituents and others with respect to what is the state doing? Why is it predicating its policies on a particular level of energy use and benchmarks and all that, in my judgment, may be dated. Anyway, that's just my observation.
We will continue to work on the information, and a big part of the California story is that we're doing these programs and we remain the 8th largest economy in the world, and we're interested in maintaining that position. And so we're very mindful of the economic impacts of these programs, and we're keeping tabs on them as well. And so I think we'll be able to have that dialogue as the years go by.
Just one follow-up or point. I appreciate the fact that we're the 8th largest economy on the planet. When I was mayor of Fresno in the 1990s, early 2000s, we were the 6th largest economy on the planet. I would submit that we have some catching up to do, and I think we need to improve the business climate along with the approaches that we're taking to make California a much more business-friendly place. I am concerned about California being so far out on the edge. We say we are going to set the standards for the rest of the world, I guess, and yet no other state is doing this. No other state is pricing carbon that I'm aware of.
There are other states that have priced carbon, both through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. There's an initiative in Oregon and Washington. We, of course, have been working in British Columbia in Canadian provinces. So we're not alone, but I take your point that we need to be mindful of the impacts of these programs on the California economy.
And I appreciate that very, very much, to have a connection of mindfulness and an appreciation of what such a reach, so deep and so significant, has on the everyday lives of ordinary people. The cost of living in the state of California, in my judgment, has been driven up to some degree where a lot of Californians can't afford the cost of living in California. Some of that has to do with well-intentioned policies that contribute to a very high surcharge, a price of living in the state of California. And I think there's got to be a very serious balancing act between those expected goals and the effect that it has on everyday people. And I hope that your comments about the importance of that connection shows itself as we go forward, because I think it's necessary.
Oh, I have a 32-year-old son who's a school teacher, so he's living on a school teacher's salary, and I'm mindful of the fact I want him to continue to be living in this great state that we have. So I have a personal interest in making sure that we understand the economic impacts of these programs.
We all do. Yeah. We all do. My oldest son is a plumbing contractor. Yeah. You should hear what he says to me about the business climate in the state of California. All right, particularly with respect to emerging policies.
Before we all go across the dais and start talking about our families.
I understand. No. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to raise this issue. I don't want to trump our family stories, but these are real people who are being absolutely affected by the policies here. Hiring less people, not buying new trucks, not buying new tools, not hiring people. It's a direct connection, and I really believe we've got to pay attention to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Patterson. I don't want to diminish the importance of our families or of any Californian story relating to this issue, but I know our folks here have another committee meeting they have to go to, and so I want to try and keep the meeting moving along. So I apologize. Didn't mean to interrupt you there. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. We'll be seeing you again as things move forward. And again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Yes. And we're going to move on to the Public Utilities Commission now, and Mr. Picker and company. While President Picker is stepping forward, I want to welcome him to his first appearance before the committee here and congratulate him upon for his appointment to the presidency of the Public Utilities Commission. It is good to see you here, and I appreciate, and I think the committee appreciates the fact that you essentially volunteered to step forward and be here at the meeting today. Normally, it is a department head who is here, but I think you felt it was important and took it upon yourself to appear before us. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I am Michael Picker. I'm the newly appointed president of the California Public Utilities Commission, and I'll apologize for my voice, and I hope that I make it through the discussion and your questions. I wasn't aware that I was a volunteer, so maybe I'll just sneak out the door now. Actually, I'm very grateful that you permitted me to appear here. I understand that in the past the president hasn't come and stood before you. I think that it's important for us to be accountable to the legislature and to actually speak to our budget. But I want to introduce our executive director, Tim Sullivan, and our assistant executive director for administration and finance, because otherwise, as your questions start to come to me, you would just watch me explore the boundless limits of my ignorance. And I do want to talk a little bit about what I see happening in the next year. I will thank the committee for legislation that directed us to do a zero-based budget. I think it was a useful exercise. While I can't swear that I own all the things that we found in it, I stand behind it. It's for us a very useful process by which we actually start to attribute all of our staff people and all of our functions to the statutory and constitutional requirements that have been put before us. And so I think it's actually very useful from that perspective. And I'll just give you a quick overview, but I'll tell you what I think it really means for us. And so we have a total budget of about $307 million and about 1,070 positions. And so the bulk of that comes from either ratepayer subventions or federal grants. The ratepayer subventions either come through rate payback or special charges on the budget. We also have another roughly $500 million for energy and energy efficiency, and about $440 million that goes to telecommunications. And these are funds that actually go directly back to specific classes of ratepayers for specific activities. So I'm not going to go much deeper than that, although I think that my executive director and assistant executive director will be happy to answer your deeper questions. I'm just going to speak to what I think the challenges are that we need to address in the next year. And some of this comes from things that I've learned and observed. I think some of it comes from the recognition that there's a passage that's underway from a very, very strong president who directed the organization for 12 years. And over time, we became heavily weighted towards being a policy shop, and a lot of our other operational functions have not received the same kind of attention. So a lot of what we need to do this year is really focus on the infrastructure of the organization to be better able to do the things that you ask us to do more efficiently, more transparently, and in my reckoning, more accessible to the public. We're a very difficult agency to understand. We're a very difficult agency to participate in, and I think that as much as anything else, our challenge is to make it much easier for most Californians to make sure that we actually address their specific concerns, either through our policy proceedings or through providing direct services. So that's a big challenge, and I'll just point to some of the things that we're doing to prepare for that. It's what consumes about 95% of my time. But all this really starts at the top. And so one of the first things that we have to do is get the commissioners to actually take responsibility and to actually provide some governance for the organization. In the past, we've all had essentially a policy portfolio that we focused on. And we left the larger questions to the executive staff. And I think we need to actually do things like meet in public to talk about the organization, adopt a code of conduct for commissioners and a job description. There is no documented job description for commissioners. We don't have a code of conduct that describes how we relate to each other, how we relate to staff, and what our responsibilities are to the public. And I think it's very important that we begin with that. I think over time we need to establish in the same kind of public discussions and through actual votes what it is that we're delegating to staff and how we measure their effectiveness in performing those tasks. I don't think that we have that. We have a lot of informal delegations, but we don't have things that actually exist on paper with actual accountability measures and metrics for actually measuring progress over time towards achieving those. So that calls on us, I think, in part to also start to think about where we're going to be in 3 to 5 years. A lot of the industries that we regulate are changing faster than we can adopt policy. A good example is one of the telecom proceedings has lasted 4 years, and the target of that proceeding is the landline telephone industry. During the time that's been litigated and relitigated by all the participants, 40% of that industry has gone away, and people now use cell phones. So again, we're going to have to really figure out how we do that more effectively, how we include more people in the conversations, how we are more transparent about it. So I think that those will actually then improve some of the ethical challenges that we're currently being labeled with. So it will also provide you the detail that you need for actually assessing whether we have the right level of resources and the right level of staffing. And I think part of that challenge, again, is do we have the right skill sets and the right tools to actually provide that. And I think that at the end of this year, I hope and expect that we'll be able to present you not just with a budget for the next calendar year, but with a strategic staffing plan. I'll give just a example that I've observed is that a lot of our rate-setting experts are aging out of the organization, and we have a lot of lawyers and economists in the organization, largely recruited from Bay Area universities, and they are good economists and they are good lawyers, but in rate setting, you need engineers and accountants. And one of our challenges will be trying to find those skill sets in the Bay Area markets. So I think that we really do need to think about the future. We need to present you not just with our strategic staffing plan and next year's budget, but we'll need to give you a 3 or longer period process by which we're going to renew the organization to be able to accomplish the tasks that you set for us in the world as it's changing. I won't go into it in a lot more detail except to say that we have 2 fact sheets that detail all the different kinds of efforts that we're undertaking to modernize and reform the PUC. I'd be happy to leave them here for you. It's some of it's very wonkish and deep, but it is in fact the principal task that I'm setting for the organization this year is to become a better PUC. I think a piece of that is actually improving our safety programs And they have suffered both from attrition and from probably lack of attention. It's not a sexy place to be in an agency that's primarily getting attention and being rewarded for our work on energy and greenhouse gas reductions. But as I don't think I need to describe to you, it's an absolutely essential function. Not only do we need to make sure the utilities are spending their money in the public's interest in terms of building infrastructure at an affordable rate, but we need to make sure that people are safe from that infrastructure. I don't think that we have done well. I think that we are making progress. But I think that, again, it starts at the top. And last year, the Commission, for the first time, adopted overarching policies for an area of our function. We adopted a safety policy. We called on staff to provide us with a safety plan. We have that safety plan. We have a new executive director who helped to frame that. We have new citation authorities, which were given to us by the legislature, thank you very much, that allow us to actually take faster action. We've actually built a very primitive case tracking system. I would emphasize that I don't think that we have the enforcement programs that we need to have in this day and age, but we actually have a series of citations that we've issued for both the gas and electric safety sides of the energy utilities, and I think on some of the muni rail for their failures. Those are much faster than our normal investigative processes, which generally last about 2 years. I think that it's still within the law, but we've delegated a lot of the tasks that normally went through our full-on proceedings, and it's actually going to bear some fruit because people actually see a linkage between their behaviors and some recognition and action on the part of the PUC. So I think we have a long way to go. I'll just say that when we lost the motor carrier division due to deregulation of the trucking industry, lost 155 staff. That was the heart of our investigators. Those were the people who went out in the field and knew how to do a field interrogation, knew how to collect evidence, knew how to put together a case docket and be able to shop it around to DAs. And at some point, when those people go away, and you start replacing them with economists and lawyers, you lose the kinds of skill set that actually makes for a true organization-wide enforcement culture. So recapturing that becomes a important piece of what we have to do this year and continue to build to the future. So I'll just move on to your last question, is what is it that we continue to do around greenhouse gas reductions? And I think our principal tasks have always been to actually ensure that there was observance of the state's RPS goals as articulated through follow-on legislation to AB 32, and we're sort of at a point of passage there as well. I'll just kind of give you some of the things we've learned from the RPS and talk a little bit about what we're doing for next steps internally. But I'm going to take a sip of water first. Hay fever has got me bad. In the last 6 years, we've actually permitted about 18 gigawatts of new renewable energy facilities, mostly here in the state of California. It turns out that the painful, torturous, and excruciating processes that we subject facilities to here in California were simply not enough to deter them, and we were fairly successful in citing permitting and getting interconnection arranged for those projects. Of those, 11 gigawatts are already injecting electricity into the California grid. There's another 4 gigawatts of large-scale projects that are someplace out there floating in various permitting, local or state processes, and probably will step forward at some point in the future. I think that we'll probably get to 33% at a point before the 2020 goal. Some utilities will probably exceed that 33% goal. One of the things that's come as a result of this is we built a large cadre of developers who know how to actually site and build and interconnect these projects here in California. But another thing that's very fortunate, and one of the intended outcomes, is that renewable electricity has become a commodity. you can get wind contracts for about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Not so much in California, but nearby California. And then the most recent large-scale contract that I reviewed was actually from Austin Energy, 5 cent per kilowatt hour solar. The cost of a new natural gas peaker, which is as variable as renewable energy projects, is 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So I had a conversation yesterday with our counterparts in Nevada. They're seeing the same thing. They are not sure that they are going to adopt a larger RPS goal in the same way, simply because the utilities there are looking at competitive pricing rather than picking by technology. I think we learned a couple other things. It's important to recognize that when San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station dropped out of the California electric grid, the problem wasn't replacing it with energy. There was a lot of renewable electricity coming over the mountains from Imperial County, and that actually supplied the energy needs of that area fairly capably. What we lost was a particular electrical value, reactive power, which is usually provided by spinning mass, that allows and actually helps power to flow into those weak areas of the grid. Without San Onofre, the grid was actually designed for San Onofre to be there to provide that kind of reactive power as well as the energy. It became very iffy as to whether we could get power to flow to portions of North San Diego County and South Orange County, North San Diego County. So we took some very quick steps to actually ensure that reliability, and I think that we're in pretty good shape. But two things emerged from all this. One is that we have too much electricity certain parts of the day. We've actually been curtailing some solar power because certain times of the year we have more renewable electricity than we actually use here. Any electricity in California. We're not going to shut off hydro. We're not going to shut off Diablo. We also find that it's very locational. It's not just how much electricity you have at any given point. It's not whether you have enough or too much at various parts of the year. It's also where it is. It's locational. We're also finding that some of the best buys out there don't come with 30-year contracts. The financing has changed in ways that the traditional long-term contracts for independent power producers are shrinking even in the renewables world. And we're finding that we actually only need bits and pieces during certain times of the day and certain times of the year. So some of the challenges, what do we do with the excess? How do we actually create demand around that? Two is, how do we actually have it meet the needs of the grid? And three is, how do we start to take advantage of some of the new technologies that are moving into the California economy? And I'll just point to some of the things that we did in the San Onofre region to meet the electrical needs without having to build all power plants. One of the things that came up is that people are actually starting to say, hey, you need more electricity these days of the year, or you need more demand certain times of the day. We will move our electrical use around if you give us a price. And so that avoids the cost of new power plants in some cases. It actually meets our electrical needs better. Probably the weirdest one is a retail shopping mall developer who bought 50 megawatts of batteries. That's one of the largest battery purchases in the world. And what they're doing is they're buying cheap electricity under contract during the early parts of the day when there's excess. That will increase as more PV comes into the marketplace, because solar PV turns on when the sun comes up, keeps going till the end of the day, and the sun starts cruising down towards the horizon and the efficiencies drop off. So from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., because the demand isn't that high, we sometimes have excess electricity. That's when they will buy electricity, and they'll arbitrage it, and they'll use their batteries in the afternoon. But even more than that, this is something that the customer is doing behind the meter, and is not regulated by the PUC, they're actually offering to the utility to drop off the grid entirely certain times of the year or to sell some of their storage back. So that's an entirely different phenomenon where you have a consumer who is actually using technology to manage their demand in a way that makes for a stronger, more reliable grid. And as long as they're buying power during the parts of the day when we have excess renewables, they're doing it with no additional greenhouse gas. So we're going to have to figure out how that all works together. And we have our staff working very hard to start thinking about what are the best ways to frame this new kind of a procurement strategy that takes advantage time of day, location, new technologies, demand resources is important in some places, just generating resources. That's a toughie, but we'll get there. So that's what I see for next year, and sorry if I went on too long. I'll let my staff answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for a very good and frank discussion of many of the issues that the PUC is facing. You are all of our departments are very large and complex. Yours is particularly so, and we really appreciate the frankness of your comments here this morning and look forward to more as we go forward.